Hi, and welcome to a small, medium, at large podcast. I'm your host, Gail Heisen, bringing you intimate interviews beyond normal boundaries. I want to thank all you listeners for subscribing, commenting, sharing, and staying with us over these last couple of years as we began our podcast. I really appreciate the fans that we have that have just write the most nicest things to us. And I just a shout out to all you nice people who've just really supported us. I also want to thank my children for producing the show for me, and also for all these wonderful guests who've introduced me to other guests, and it's been sort of a wonderful way of connecting to all these new people. So let me tell you a little bit about our guest today. In fact, our guest is a podcast host himself, so let me tell you about him. Ben Sinclair is the host of Unravelling the Universe, a podcast and YouTube channel dedicated to long form interviews with scientists, academics, researchers, and experiencers. The show explores phenomena related to three questions. What happens after we die? Are we alone in the universe or on Earth? What is the nature of reality? He has had previous guests, which include Dr. Jim Tucker, Dr. Bruce Grayson, Dr. Dean Radin, Nick Cook, Dr. Raymond Moody, Leslie Kean, and many others. The main areas of discussion on his show include UFOs, UAP, psychic phenomena, consciousness, and phenomena related to the survival of consciousness, such as NDEs, near death experiences, mediumship, and reincarnation. Ben has done and continues to do a lot of research into these extraordinary phenomena and tries to balance his curiosity and open mind with his natural skepticism. Let's welcome Ben here today. Hi, Ben. Welcome. I think
Hey,
you're
Gail.
here. You're here in France, aren't you?
That's right. I am. Yeah. And thank
Yes.
you very much for inviting me to do this with you.
I think this is wonderful. We have two. You and I are both podcast hosts, and we're interviewing each other. And I've been on your show, and now I'm really honored to have you on mine. I I always begin with the beginning, which is where did you grow up? Are you from France or where are you from? And did you have a family that encouraged investigating as a child? Did you have a lot of curiosities back then about stars or planets or things that were around you? Or is this something that happened at some other pivotal point in your life? But what was your family like, and were they supportive about these areas? I'd like to hear because everyone has a very interesting background.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in the countryside in southern England, like near to Cheddar. Everybody knows the cheese. Some people know the gorge. But yeah, around that kind of area. And anyway, I mean, I've lived here now for a good few years. But in terms of my family and how that was and whether that kind of shaped me into these areas. So first of all, I would say definitely I was blessed to have a very loving family, caring family, like really, it was great. I have no complaints and just really happy and know how lucky I am to have had the childhood that I did. But is it a but or is it just an and? I don't know. But either way, it was a religious family, so I was brought up in a Christian family, to going to church when I was young, on Sundays and that kind of thing, being encouraged to pray and all of that kind of stuff. So in short, it wasn't really encouraged to look into these areas. Like what happens after we die was answered. It was eternity in heaven or an eternity in hell if you're bad, or if you don't believe in God. And are we alone? I mean, that one, my parents are still pretty open minded on that. So it's not like they would say, don't look into the sky for, things that look different because we're all there is. So that wasn't the case. But yeah, the what happens after we die was very much, we had the answer. There was nothing to look into. And the same for kind of what was the nature of reality, as the kind of the upbringing is that all the answers are in the Bible.
Mhm.
um, so now it's much more interesting when I'm questioning everything and having conversations with my parents, and we kind of go back and forth. And yeah, they still follow the Christian faith, and that's all good. And yeah, but no, I was blessed to have a great upbringing. But in very much in the Christian sense. Yeah.
But they supported you when you decided to investigate and look into things for yourself. They didn't say to you, you're going to hell now or anything, right?
Not quite, not quite. No. It makes my mum quite uncomfortable, to be honest. Like some of the, like particularly things like mediumship and stuff like that. Like she's definitely softened a lot to some of the phenomena, like reincarnation. She softened a bit to that because initially when I first mentioned that to her, she was like, "Well, you know, that goes against the Bible and stuff like that." But eventually, I think, yeah, warmed up a little bit to some of these things, and I've said, "Oh, you know, it doesn't necessarily contravene, it doesn't go against your Bible in you know, necessarily, like maybe they can kind of coexist." But mediumship is definitely too far for some of my family, particularly. My nan is of course another level up in terms of how religious, so that's harder. We don't get into topics like this too much, although she does have some fascinating stories. It's just of course they're all from the point of view of Christianity, but
Right.
I hear the same story and I just kind of substitute maybe Jesus for whatever it might be, and I substitute God for whatever that might be, and I kind of still hear the story and take it seriously. I just look at it through an open-minded lens.
Wonderful. That's wonderful. Uh, so what did you do as a career, or what was your what was your focus that you were doing besides now doing podcast and investigative work?
Yeah, yeah. Originally, so I did go to university only for a year, basically went to study business management. And after a year, I was like, this is fun, but I'm really not great at like convincing, I'm committing to studying outside of, you know, lessons. And I wasn't really built for it, I don't think, at least at that point in my life. So I decided I'm going to leave and I'm going to try and get a job and start earning some money and going to essentially get experience, which is going to be as beneficial to me as the degree. At least that was kind of the thing I was telling myself at that point. I ended up going into a state agency, or real estate, maybe as you know in America. So I was selling houses basically, which was fun. I enjoyed it. It was I was good at it, but it was very, you know, long hours. It was very sale driven, like you're hitting targets, and you know, it's like yeah, the very kind of corporate lifestyle. And to be honest, like trying to convince people to buy something when they might not be totally into it, like now I wouldn't be able to do that. I don't like that. I guess at the time I kind of, you know, felt that's what I need to do and that's what we do, and okay, so I'm going to do it. And like I said, I was good at it because I was just able to talk to people. And I mean, I wasn't like, you know, this slimy estate agent that people
Right.
picture sometimes. I wasn't like doing anything really dodgy, but it at the end of the day, like people should be able to just make their own decisions. So I'm sales as much as it was a part of my life. And after estate agency I went to recruitment, same kind of story there. um yeah, I kind of had a point where things went a little bit off the track, if you want. Like I was kind of working my way up in these various areas and in recruitment, and ended up having some kind of differences of opinions, to put it gently, with the owner of one of the companies that I was working in. And it kind of just threw me off, and I'd never really experienced anything along the lines of bullying before, because I'd always just, I wouldn't tolerate anything like that. But in this situation, like due to the nuance of it, and I won't go into it now, but due to like how complicated it was, I kind of just couldn't really do anything. And so I kind of had to just let this happen. And so yeah, I had people not being great with me, and long story short, it pushed me into a spiral of like depression and you know, really low. And I think that was what eventually led me to start discovering a lot of these areas, and to start, you know, like yeah, changing my perspective.
So like it was sort of some people refer to it as dark nights of the soul or
Yeah.
something like this, which when people don't judge, that's really usually is often a pivotal place where we make a change in our life towards a different path, whatever
Yeah.
path it is. So is that around when you started to research and get involved in the nature of reality and consciousness and things like this? Have you been at this investigative work for some time now, or how many years have you been doing this?
I don't think that was when it started, but I think that was like basically the catalyst to, like, that was one of the catalysts, let's say, one of the things that put me on that path. So it kind of set me in the right direction. But yeah, I didn't get into researching like what happens after we die or these various other areas until about 3 years ago now. The
Mm.
UFO thing came a little bit earlier. Like I was interested in that from maybe 2000 and well, I don't actually know when I started being interested in it, quite a long time ago. And then my interest became much more serious around 2017. But yeah, the other ones came much later. The other ones came much later.
So I am going to ask those particular questions, but before I get to that, um, I want to mention to our listeners that your podcast has over 6,000 subscribers and a list of very interesting guests in the field you're interested in. I was wondering if you can tell listeners who maybe some have never heard of, what is the difference between, we all know what UFO is, but
Mm-hmm.
UAP seems to be a newer term in the last few years. I don't know how many years it's been, so I was wondering if you could just explain what that terms are for our listeners.
Yeah, sure. So UFO, probably everybody knows that one is unidentified flying object. So it's kind of, yeah, straight away leads to object, which is a physical thing. So it doesn't leave much to the imagination. Whereas UAP, I think the main reason that it's transitioned to that, and it's been quite a while ago that that happened, but it's been in the more and more in like legislation and the media and the public. So that started to become used more. I think it's largely to get rid of the baggage that was attached to UFO, because you know people would hear UFO and they'd think, oh, you know, crazy or this or that, or like they just laugh a lot of the time. They still do on TV a lot of the time. So yeah, it was to get rid of the baggage. And I think a year or two ago, UAP meant unidentified aerial phenomena being potentially an object, but also potentially weather or something else, you know, atmospheric phenomena, loads of things it could be. Now they've made it even more vague and even broader. So now UAP stands for unidentified anomalous phenomena.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. So it's pretty open. Basically, anything that you see, and again, as you can hear from unidentified anomalous phenomena, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the sky. So I think part of the reason for that as well is because that these things are seen underwater and things like that. That's kind of a growing area of investigation for a lot of people, is these USOs. And so that's maybe part of the reason to have this kind of coverall of the various domains, like yeah, undersea or in the sky or in space as well. And so yeah, unidentified anomalous phenomena is the kind of coverall, the catch-all.
That like, oh, I had no idea about including the sea. That's very interesting because they are finding amazing things that you hear about, even, whether it's some sort of sea creature that's never been seen
Mm.
before, or the depths. And we haven't even explored the depths of the oceans. It's a
Yeah, there's some crazy creatures that live down there. Have you seen like some of the documentaries with the fish that have like lights that come off the back of their head, like fluorescent lighting, and just absolutely incredible stuff?
amazing. So, since you've been interviewing some scientists and people in this field, what can you tell us that you've gathered from the people that you've had on your show and the work that you've done? Are you a believer that there is UAPs, or I think that's probably a better term now because it really encompasses a lot of uh, possibilities. What is your feeling about this now that you've done some research and have had some amazing guests that spoke about this?
Yeah, sure. And I think in terms of which one the better term is, I think, yeah, when you're talking in generality, UAP is, yeah, like you say, it's much more easier to talk about. UFO, I think, like if I look out the window and I see something I'm like convinced that it's a craft, like a physical object, then I'm just not going to beat around the bush. I'm going to go straight for it. That's a UFO. So I think UFO kind of, they can be both a UAP and a UFO, but a UFO is a more specific, yeah, term for something. But what do I think is going on essentially? What do I think there's something
And
there?
where do, when they say UFO or they say UAP, I'm not sure where the term alien fits in, or if that's part of this, or they're only discussing objects. So if you can tell anything about that also, as you tell us about the UFO.
Yeah, I mean, alien is probably again like the alien thing is probably part of the reason why lots of people have switched to calling them UAP rather than UFO, because UFO, yeah, everybody would, you'd have Neil deGrasse Tyson going straight to space aliens and like trying to say it in this funky voice to make this like massive, ooh, space aliens. And so where do aliens fit in? I mean, I don't know, obviously. I just can speculate. And there is a lot of kind of anecdotal evidence to say that there is some kind of intelligence here, whether it's, extraterrestrial or, and again, some of these things I can't even like quantify or qualify really. I can't really tell you exactly what interdimensional means. I can't go into detail on that because that's like way over my head, but that's one of the things that lots of people in this area kind of talk about. Could they be interdimensional, extra dimensional? It's something even that David Grush has talked about in Congress, like kind of hinted towards that. You've got this future human hypothesis as well. So there's various hypotheses. There's an idea that they could be from here. They could be like a species that we, has kind of evolved alongside us. There's loads of different, ways of looking at it. Ultimately, yeah, what do I think? I think there's some kind of intelligence here. Uh, Beyond that, like a while ago, I thought clearly the most straightforward and the most easy to comprehend explanation would be aliens, aka extraterrestrial beings from another planet, maybe like one or two galaxies over, something like that, not too far away in galaxy terms and universe terms. So that was, yeah, what I always used to think, like that's the easiest way to explain it. But then when you maybe kind of take more into account and you look at the work of Jacques Vallée and stuff like that, and about how long these things have been here and the similarities with various folklore and things along those lines. I haven't read all of his books that I'd like to yet, but maybe there's something more complicated going on. Maybe it's not just simply beings from another planet visiting us in physical craft. I just don't know really. All I know is that there's something. I'm pretty certain of that. And so I find it such a fascinating area to explore. Wouldn't surprise me if there's multiple things happening at once as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I it's it's always made me wonder what, like, now when I've interviewed a few different people, like there are some people who are so sure about what they're speaking about, and they refer to things that seem a little too way out there for me, where
Mm.
these different alien civilizations, and there's the Greys, and there's the, I don't know what the other ones were, and they have a whole story behind it all and all that. And that seemed a little far-fetched for me, but the idea that there is the possibility of intelligence or other life other than in our universe, that seems like a possible, like why just because we're in this galaxy, there's so much else out there. How can you not think that there's a possibility of some other life form or intelligence or whatever the word would be, but not necessarily bodies like we're thinking of us being. Maybe there's some other higher form that's out there that we know nothing about. It just
Yeah,
it seems too little to think like we're the only planet that exists.
definitely.
Yeah, that just doesn't seem.
There's like so many planets out there, like, and so many, solar systems, and so many planets that are in the habitable zone in their solar system. Like, I would imagine there are infinite, civilizations, planets that are full of life like ours, probably in every shape and size, as you kind of alluded to. There's going to be some things that are alive, but are so different that we kind of can't even, we wouldn't even recognize it as life if we saw it. You know, but then there might also, I would expect there would also be life that would be very similar to us, like especially because it does seem fairly logical for something to evolve and have the two hands, two arms, and not that I'm kind of, obviously I don't have much basis for comparison, but it doesn't seem like a really, I don't know. What am I saying? I'm rambling, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are species that are similar to us as well. And you mentioned the Greys. I interviewed somebody recently, a couple of times actually, Danny Sheehan. He was the lawyer of Dr. John Mack, who used to work for Harvard, psychiatrist many years ago. And Danny is still, working in the UFO, kind of working on the UFO issue. He's a very reputable lawyer. He's worked on loads of massive cases in America, in the US where you are. And anyway, he has recently come out and said that, yeah, he thinks there are 5 whatever different species visiting us. and he's included like the grays, these small gray beings. He's included like tall gray beings, reptilian beings. I can't remember off the top of my head the other, maybe some mantis looking beings. But either way, he's kind of take said that publicly, which is obviously some massive claims. He bases it based on records from John Mack, largely because John Mack interviewed many people who claimed to have been abducted, claimed to have had these experiences. And John Mack wanted to find out what was going on with this phenomenon. As I said, he was a Harvard psychiatrist. It's a whole other story going down into John Mack's life and career. But yeah, long story short, Danny Sheehan has looked at hundreds of these various accounts, and he feels quite confident in saying publicly that we're being visited by those things. I don't feel the same level of confidence to say the same, but I'm open to it. Just hope they're friendly.
I think it's very important for us always to be able to be open, because I always talk about how I never really believed that spoon bending was a real thing, but I was open to it. And then when all of a sudden I was bending a fork, I realized, oh wait, this isn't a fake thing. This actually does occur. But I
Yeah.
didn't really believe it till but at least I was open. I didn't walk away and say, oh no, that's not real. So why would I try that? So I think being open is, and being curious like you are is very important. So I'm going to move on from our UFOs onto uh, what happens after we die. I uh, I myself have had a near-death experience, and I have my own, things around that. And I'm wondering two questions here. One
Mm-hmm.
is, have you yourself had any near-death experience or paranormal experiences in your own life?
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's from your experience of near death or from the amazing peoples like Dr. Moody, Raymond Moody, or any of these people you spoke to, what conclusions have you come up with that what happens after we die? It's a big question. It's a loaded question.
Yeah, yeah, it is. I know. You're giving me a taste of my own medicine.
Yeah.
Um, so first of all, have I had any experiences? Definitely, I've never had like a near-death experience or anything like really profound along those lines. I had some kind of maybe experiences, if I'm being totally honest with myself. Like I'm not sure. I certainly wouldn't rule them out, but I certainly don't feel like, oh, I'm 100% confident that that's what it was. I guess I lean towards that they were, at least one of them was a genuine kind of experience. And what it was potentially an after death communication from my late grandfather, my beloved granddad.
Mhm.
Um, and it was in a dream. Like I just had this dream. Do you want me to kind of talk about it
Yeah,
quickly?
because when you're saying this to me, I'm believing that your grandfather did come to you, because that's my experience. So I know that's very real. I don't
Yeah.
question that. And when you might question it, but I'm sure he did come to you, because the dream is one of the most easiest places for the spirit of the deceased, I feel, to connect with us.
Yeah.
So I'm in all full support that he did come. So let's hear what he had to say.
Thank you. And yeah, it's just hard for me because I still have this skeptic within me that really finds it hard to let go, really find it hard to just believe it. Like, but anyway, as I said, I'm pretty open to it. I definitely lean towards that. I think it was a legitimate communication, which again is something a couple of years ago I would never have dreamed of thinking along these lines or talking along these lines. This would have been totally outside of my comfort zone. Anyway, the dream in a nutshell, I'll just kind of summarize it, was I was visiting some family in an apartment that seemed kind of wasn't one I knew or anything like that. So the place itself was pretty random. My granddad, who this was after he had passed away, yeah, but before he passed away, he died of cancer. He died of cancer, and we knew about it for a few months before that. Like there was nothing really that could be done, and anyway, so I was just a bit of context for this dream, because in the dream he did have cancer and he was asleep while I was seeing other family members and things like that. And then I decided it's time for me to leave. So I get my stuff together. I'm going. I open the door of the apartment. I close it behind me. There's some steps in between the apartment and the main entrance to the building. So I start walking down these stairs. And just as I get to the bottom, I hear the door behind me open, and I look back, and it's Granddad, and he's looking at me, and he's like, "Oh, are you gonna go without like saying goodbye and giving me a hug and stuff?" And I was like, "Oh, I thought you were asleep. I didn't want to wake you." And so I ran up the stairs, like really excited, and we just had this big hug. And I just remember this hug, and he gave amazing hugs when he was alive, and we just had this hug. And I remember having this thought process as we were hugging in my dream that is that we both knew that this would be like our last hug kind of thing. That was like, we both were aware of this fact. It was unspoken, but we were both, and again, I don't know how I had this level of awareness, but that's what I had. And then yeah, I left, and that was that dream. And there was maybe one other dream, but not as compelling as that one for me, and I don't remember it enough to go into it now. But yeah, that one was touched me, whether or not it was real.
Well, I think it was probably real, and it'll probably always stay with you forever.
Mm.
I just feel like you'll be able to, you can just step right into that feeling of having him hold you that way. Because I feel like it happened to you in the real physical bodies, and then it happened to you in the invisible body. So I feel like that's a clincher.
Yeah, yeah.
So what, what, what are the things that you've heard from, like, say, Dr. Raymond Moody? What are they speaking about when they're on your show and you ask them about what happens after we die? What is their, this is somebody who's been studying this for some time. Isn't he didn't he do a lot of near-death experience? That was his research. I think
Mm.
that's the same.
Yeah, yeah. I think Raymond coined the term near-death experience in his book Life After Life, which maybe 75, or maybe I don't know the date it was published, but around then maybe. But anyway, yeah, he, along with Bruce Grayson and everybody like this who have worked in these areas a lot and studied it a lot. What kind of thing do they say when I ask them what happens? Generally speaking, everybody seems to agree that we survive. That's the first thing, that death is not the end of our experience. Raymond was a really interesting character, actually. Like I expected him to have kind of polished, view on what he thinks happened, but he was still pretty like, I don't really know. And like, I'm pretty, and again, I'm kind of paraphrasing because it was a while ago that I spoke to him, but in the end, he was kind of saying, yeah, I'd still kind of go both ways. And I kind of pushed him a little bit to say, where do you lean? Like, what's your, which way do you lean towards? And he did say he thinks that survival is the most likely outcome, and he thinks we do survive death. But normally people are more, have more conviction on it than that. Normally, like, Bruce Grace and everybody like that are pretty confident that the evidence points towards the survival of consciousness after death. And I stand with that. Like, I'm very much on board with them, that I think that death, when like, if somebody says to me, what do you think happens after we die, I can answer it in one word: something. That's definitely what I think happens after we die, is something. I don't think it's the end of our experience. Obviously, I could speculate about it for hours. I could just kind of ramble and speculate, and we could both do that. We could have a back and forth, but we really don't know the details. I do think that reincarnation is a part of it, somehow, a part of the puzzle. I got the book there, Jim Tucker's book. I'm not very good at pointing there
Yeah.
before. That's a fascinating phenomenon, and I think there's so much evidence for that I don't see how anybody can read that book and look into the evidence that they've got for this phenomenon and come up with any explanation that isn't really that isn't reincarnation. The only other one that you can even grasp at straws with is the super psi hypothesis that you're probably familiar with.
No.
Um, it's like some people that are kind of open to the evidence for survival, but kind of remain on the fence. So people, they claim that it's because these things could be also accounted for by psychic phenomena being essentially unlimited in how strong they can be. And so lots of people would claim that like mediumship could just be the medium like reading the person's mind, or remote viewing some information somewhere else. Like, like if a medium is sitting there and they're talking to somebody and they say, oh yeah, your dad says that his will is in the garage door here, if he wrote it down anywhere or told anybody that was alive, this medium can then access that person's mind via telepathy, or access the information. So technically, if it's unlimited, then it's really hard to find bits of evidence that are pretty definitive, like, oh, that's survival. But either way, for me, even if it's super psi, that's still kind of opens the door for survival, right? um yeah.
I mean, this is something, uh, we had a Hindu monk that lived with us when I was a kid growing up, in the early sixties. And I was exposed to reincarnation, and meditation and these sort of things way before, became in style. And, I have had different moments throughout life where I think, yes, this is reincarnation. No wonder this child is born and they can play like Beethoven, or they people that show amazing skills at a young age, like as if they
Mm.
were born to this, or were that person reincarnated. And then as the years went on, I started to think, well, I don't know. And this is it's still I'm still confused about this. Like, I know in the Buddhist tradition, a bowl of things are set out for young monks that they find, or young children that are not monks yet, and they bring them to the table full of these artifacts. And if the child is drawn towards certain artifacts and says, "Oh, I lived in this town," and they have amazing stories that how
Mm.
could a child know and experience what it was like to be in World War II, or things like this that they have.
Yeah.
But then it made me wonder, so like, do we all of a sudden we die, and then do we dangle around and then we drop into another body, or do we drop into a moment at conception, or is it when the baby is a couple years old and we enter? So I'm not I believe that something is happening, but I don't have an idea in my mind, or a movie in my mind of like, it didn't make sense that, like, so then in a year do we become and I think like we're all connected when we see families and we feel certain things about different members that we see in our life growing up, where it feels like you've known them before, or
Hmm.
you've played a certain role with them. Sometimes you might feel like, I feel like I was their mother once, or you might have these kind of different things, but I don't have any set idea in my mind. It all seems very confusing
Mm.
about what, and is reincarnation only if you're a Buddhist and you're this spiritual person? So that's when you've reached enlightenment, so you're going to come
Hmm.
back in and redo this again to be a teacher for others? Or is somebody who was a car mechanic like my dad or something, who was a spiritual guy, did he just die and that was it, or did he jump back in somewhere? Is one of the children our family being born, is that spirit in there? I have no answer to this. So
Yeah.
what do you think?
I mean, there's so many great points that you've raised there, and I'd like to like go through all of them and try and give you my kind of 2 cents.
Yes.
But like, let me try and remember some of the things. So in terms of like, first of all, yes, it's confusing and it's hard to wrap the head around, and I'm still not there. And just as I would begin to think, oh, I might be getting a grip on this, there'll be really confusing elements to it that throw you off, right? So there are things like there are cases where the previous personality, how do I even say this? Basically the child that has the memories and the previous personality, right? That's like the two key people in a reincarnation situation. So there are cases where the previous personality goes into a child before the previous personality is dead. There are cases where this can happen in like adults after like a certain, I think, certain injuries or things like that. There's been cases along those lines that there's some really, there can be really confusing stuff. They call it like anomalous date cases. Um, so where do I go? Right. So in terms of the Buddhist stuff, I don't necessarily think it works exactly as it does, as it says it does in Buddhism. I don't know exactly how they say it works, but what I do know from Jim Tucker's research at DOPS, from all the cases there, nearly 3,000 cases, they don't actually have any, seemingly from the evidence they have, there's no link with karma. There's no like, oh, if people were really good in their previous life, they have a great life situation for the next one, or if they were really bad, do they have a bad, like, there doesn't seem to be that like a correlation. It's not to say it's a definite thing because there's not enough cases to be sure, but it points in that direction. The only thing that does seem to have a real impact is, because you mentioned actually, is how much somebody meditated before. And what it seems, and again, tiny sample size for this specific statistic, so it's not enough to be certain about by any means, but it seems if somebody meditated, if they were a meditator, they're more likely to then have be reincarnated, or they're more likely for whoever, like, to have memory of their previous life if they were a meditator in the previous life. And it's also like the more they meditated, the more clear their memories would be, like the more memories the child would have of the previous life. So I thought that's really interesting, even though it's a tiny, tiny sample size for that. It's fascinating because meditation just seems to be so influential in all of these different things. A couple more points about, you were saying like how long in between, like how long after I die and stuff. So that's what we call like an intermission period. So these children, a lot of them have intermission memories. So some of them would say, I remember, like, being in this place, this realm, I don't know, like talking to an entity, a being, a god, whatever. And some of them report choosing their parents. So like there's one, I spoke to his dad, actually. James Leininger is a really famous case, in one of the most famous ever, I think. His dad is called Bruce. I spoke to his dad, Bruce, and I've also spoken to Jim about that case, and Jim was the guy that studied that case. But anyway, James said he remembered choosing his parents. I think how it came up is they were sitting in the yard together at the back of their house, and James said to his dad, he's like, I knew you were going to be good parents. That's why I picked you. And Bruce is like, what do you mean? And he's like, that's why I picked you. I picked you at the big pink hotel on the beach. In He might have said, I don't remember if he said the country, but the big pink hotel on the beach. And I think Bruce is like thinking like, oh, what's he talking about? And then it kind of clicks, and yeah, like they went to a big hotel on the beach and had a dinner, and like I can't remember the name of the hotel. I think it was in Hawaii, maybe.
Why?
And it all added up dates wise and everything like that. And there's other cases, yeah, where like somebody would have the memory of kind of essentially floating, like a consciousness with no body, floating in like a marketplace, and they see somebody that they're like, oh, I feel connected to that person or whatever, so they follow them home, and then that night the person conceives a child, and like the child then 3 years later says, oh, I remember, and I saw you in this market, and I decided to go home with you, and I wanted you to be my dad. And it's and so back to the intermission as well. Sometimes it can be 10 years, sometimes it can, I think the most common is, and I should have checked this, I don't have it off the top of my head, but the most common is, I think, less than a couple of years. It's something like maybe 6 months to 2 years or something like that. I could be wrong. But yeah, the actual range, like it can be decades, it could be days, and it could happen just before, like if somebody's in the dying process and say their granddaughter has a child while they're in the dying process, maybe their consciousness is already detached enough from the dying body and is able to then go in there. There have been cases along those lines. Yeah.
I find it fascinating. And what from my own experience, I always find these strong words, but I do have experiences of mediumship myself. So that's such the title, small, medium, at large. And that's where part of it confuses me, because I know that when people come to me and I do like a little blessing, or I don't know exactly the word for it, and I do it with my shamanic tools and my shamanic clothing,
Mm-hmm.
and we go to a place where we don't speak words, but I just let whatever comes through come through me. And I'm always surprised at some of the information that comes through, where the person that's sitting there says, yep, that's exactly who my father was, or yes, that was exactly like that. So that I feel validated that I have connected to some essence of that being. So I feel like maybe that's the consciousness that I'm connecting to when I have this kind of medium
Mm-hmm.
experience. But then I say to myself, well, if they're reincarnating, how could I be connecting to their, then that's where I
Yeah.
get all confused, because I know I've had this experience, and and when I say things like I never knew about the person, like one of them where they were totally, it was the only time when I had done a blessing where the spirit of the person was saying, oh no, I don't do blessings,
Mm.
and it was like, oh, this person's telling me he doesn't want me to do this with him, and I'm explaining it to the to my friend who's lost this person, and they're saying, "Oh yeah, that's him. That's exactly what he's like. We're not allowed to do these things." So that's where my confusion runs. Or then
Yeah.
I think, well, do we, does a part of us reincarnate, but then there's a part of our consciousness that's separate from that, and
This
that's the,
is one of my speculative thoughts. Yeah, is that there's this kind of part of us, again, how we like actually define these things is really awkward, but there's some kind of part of our consciousness that's, yeah, kind of maybe in one realm, I don't know, just it's like stationary, whatever. And yeah, maybe that, yeah, we can be reincarnated, but we can also be there. And maybe, and again, in some cases with these reincarnation stuff, I told you it can get weird, is that sometimes somebody can have memory of being two people that were both alive at once, and they have like the fact to make that plausible, like even though that doesn't seem to make sense, like they have the memories that seem to go along with that. um so, I mean, what do you do with that? And sometimes it can be two people seem to remember being the same person. These are obviously much rarer. These are like kind of exceptions to the rule, but they have been documented. And so, how does that work? Maybe we can be in multiple incarnations at once. Like, I'm all about like the fact I just don't know that much about it. And another thing is that just because the evidence suggests strongly that reincarnation happens in some way, shape, or form, that doesn't mean everybody reincarnates. And you know, yeah, I think what you were saying about there being kind of two parts to it as well, I think that's probably the way I would think about it, because otherwise, yeah, it's too hard. Like if somebody has reincarnated, then how are you able to communicate? There has to be something, right?
growing up, my dad would say the line that you said all the time to us. He said, "I didn't pick you." He said, "You picked us. You don't you know that everyone picks the family they want to be born into." And I thought to myself, "I picked this, this is what
Yeah,
I picked."
yeah.
But then when I
Which,
started to look at it, it was a very, to say that to a child was a very good mind opening, thought that, oh, wait,
yeah,
maybe I had something to do with it. And it wasn't that my parents picked me.
yeah.
I hated that. But uh, I wonder what the feeling is. I've been thinking about this a bunch lately myself, which is the near death experience and what happens. And does this, I don't know if any of the people you've spoken to have talked about this, does this is my assumption, but I might be wrong about this, but I feel like when you've gone through near death experience, you're just got a tiny little window or peek or something into the future, because so far as I know, we all die. That has not changed. And so when you have the near death, does that make you more prepared, or do you end up having, I mean, I'd have to speak to a lot of people who were on their deathbed to know the answer to that, if they'd had previous things as a child or an adult where they nearly died, when they actually face the moments of death, are they more prepared? Are they more understanding about what's happening? Are they more welcoming and in less fear? Because I found near-death experience to be a very positive, energetically beautiful kind of experience. So I
Mhm.
wasn't filled with fear during it, but I was giving birth at the same time. So it had kind of a mixed thing of bringing life in
Wow.
and also leaving all it. So I experienced this amazing thing of flowers and music and light and beautiful things. And until I had two more children, I didn't realize that that's what birth was not really about. The two was, labor and delivery and a lot of work and pain. So I'm wondering, has anyone ever talked about that on the shows, about near death people? Do they feel like, oh yeah, when my
Mhm.
time comes? Because I've had one or two guests who've died and been brought back, and they say like, oh, I just can't wait till the time comes again. I'm just hanging out. What have you heard about this?
Yeah, that's a good question. And NDEs, they definitely affect people in big ways. Like they leave noticeable, remarkable changes on people's personality and like on how they approach life. So the negative way, I guess, it's a bit rarer. It's like, well, no, it's not rarer actually. It's what I'm saying. The negative way is because of the fact that of how society is. So people will feel negative because of these things are suppressed, because our society tells us this stuff doesn't happen. If you have this kind of experience, it's in your mind, you know, you're imagining it. And so people will have this experience that feels more real than anything they've ever experienced in their waking life. And yet everybody around them is telling them they're just kooky and they've just lost it. And so that's really damaging. And a lot of people will then keep it to themselves, and that in itself, you know, can cause trauma, just keeping this experience to yourself, or even convincing yourself it didn't happen. And then it can make them feel like, I'm not the same as everybody else anymore, I see things differently. And like, so it can have like an isolating and negative effect in those senses. But in an ideal world, that wouldn't be the case, because we would already be, everybody would be aware that these things happen, everybody would be aware that, you know, of how it works, and all of that. But in terms of the other side, yeah, generally speaking, near-death experiences pretty much erase people's fear of death. Like I don't think I've heard of anybody really that's had a true near-death experience and is still has a fear of death. Like they're just liberated of that fear. Does they still have the? It's not. I haven't heard many that are like, oh, I'm looking forward to it. Normally, it's like they have this kind of new love of life, but also just no fear of death. That's kind of essentially, I think, the more common. And then the other positives are like people will feel, I guess, more connected to other people and to the environment, and just more open. They'll often become more empathetic, more, you know, kinder, um probably different things along those lines. They can then have more spiritual experiences, they can have more psychic experiences, they can be more likely to have, you know, intuitive or psychic experiences or moments in their life. I think once you had one NDE, you might be more likely to have other experiences, not necessarily that you're going to die, nearly die again, but you just kind of open this door, and you're more likely to tap into these kind of things. And it's the same, like you're well aware of like meditation and all that kind of thing, and like people can have the same thing if they meditate a lot. That can open the door a bit and make them more likely to have other experiences and stuff. But yeah, NDEs is definitely one where they've got the data to show it now.
I had a guest recently, oh my God, it's always hard for me to pull the names up instantly. Anyways, he had been in a horrific car accident, and through so many different surgeries and things that occurred after from the spinal damage, he died many, many times, more than one time, had this near death. And
Wow.
he experienced connections with other beings,
Mm.
whatever we want to call them. I don't have, you know, whether alien makes it sound too, but
Yeah.
experienced something that he felt he connected with, that brought him back
Yeah.
to his body, and to you know, from the death back in. These were the people he would be communicating with when this occurred. And I hadn't heard much of that before. I've heard of people seeing other relatives and this sort of a thing, but this gentleman felt contact with other outer planetary beings, or I'm not sure I had the right word for that.
Yeah.
Helped him to survive, and, you know, and bring him back.
Wow.
And I had another guest, Donna Ribadow, and when she, after her near fatal drowning, she ended up having the ability to, which she never knew, but she just saw a class at the Monroe Center, and she was bending spoons all of a sudden, you know, in
Mm.
her 60s, bending hundreds and hundreds of spoons. And it was nothing like, she was an acupuncturist. She never thought she was a spoon bender. But all these different things started to change after that, you know, it's death and returning. Well, you know, I feel like I was in the doorways of death, but some of these people have actually clinically died, and the hospital says your heart
Yeah.
stopped, you weren't whatever. And what they experience and share is amazing, valuable things for other people to hear. I'm very grateful that my grandmother, when she was living in Poland during World War I, and she had lost her sisters to typhoid fever, and she herself was dying. And when she told me as a child how what the experience was for her, how she rose out of her body and she looked down at her body and she saw it with all her other relatives and she was with all the spirits of them, and that they said, no, it's not your time. And that's often something you do hear others say,
Hmm.
that they say, no, it's not your time. You have to go back into the body. And they're like, no, I don't really want to go. And they say, no, this is your time. You got to go back there. I was so glad as a child she told me such stories, because it wasn't that many years later when I experienced what she said, and I was only 21. And
Wow.
had I not had that like story in me somewhere, I think I would have been a lot more scared when I was leaving my body, and they're rushing me to a hospital and I'm looking down in the car, seeing my body going, wanting to speak, nothing comes out. And that's why I think it's so important for people like you and I to have these kind of podcast shows, that I mean, I don't know your main motives, but I feel like it is to just share this knowledge or information and stories with other people, so that the ones who are afraid to talk about it because their family said, oh no, you made this up, or would be able to then free themselves from things that had happened that they've been holding inside.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my main goals are raise awareness and knowledge of these things, like bring this information to more people, make more people aware that actually there's evidence that we survive death, which is a major thing, which I was so happy when I found out. I was like, wow, how did I not know this? How is nobody talking about that? So I want to fill kind of a little bit of that gap of like spreading that word. And like you said, share, like getting people to share stories about these experiences, getting people to talk about it. And I feel like that liberates, yeah, people that are listening to share their own story and to feel like, or at least to own their own story, even if they don't share it. And I love it when people comment in the comments. They say the experiences they've had that resonate with the
Yes.
episode. Or the best is when I have people that reach out to me and say like, oh, I wasn't aware of this stuff, or I was closed-minded to this stuff, and your interview really awakened this in me, and now I'm on a whole new journey of like basically my journey. It's so cool when I hear people that are kind of taking that same road.
That I don't, that to me, that's a wonderful, that's the best work we could be doing.
Yeah.
And and because that now that we have this media way to be able to spread things, we're able to talk with someone in France or some places around the world. Which I had one funny question I just wanted to ask you about France.
Hmm.
When I was there, I didn't have the best experience when I was, and that was, I was pregnant. I was 21 years old or 20 years old there. Um, England, England is my second out of the United States. England's my next country that listens the most to my YouTubes and my podcasts.
Same.
And I'm wondering, it seems to me that England, with the Theosophical Societies or whatever the different organizations, that they've really for many years have always supported investigation into paranormal and other things like this. So
Hmm.
I think when you're there, there's a lot of like-minded people and conferences and things that are going on there that stimulate this kind of talk. And I'm wondering, now that you live in France, do you find like-minded groups and people that are also similar, or is in the French culture the paranormal not as widely accepted and spoken about like it is in England?
Good question. I don't really feel like I could give a proper answer because I haven't really been able to integrate, either in the UK or here. I know in the UK there's lots of societies and stuff, and in France there is like the Institute of Metaphysique, the Institut Métaphysique in Paris, which is like they have for example, like the Kluski molds. You've heard of Franek Kluski? He was a physical medium that they like years ago. A few like Nobel winning scientists tried to study him, and they tried to basically he made materializations of hands, allegedly made materializations of hands and feet and stuff appear, and they would ask him to like dip it in this bowl of paraffin essentially, and they made molds from what were allegedly these materializations, and they have that on display at the Institute Metaphysique in Paris. I'm just got in touch with somebody that works at the university in Lyon. I think he's a psychologist and he's into our areas. He's done some work on like telepathy and various other phenomena in these areas. And I think he's started some kind of, group to support people that go through these kind of things. So I'm going to hopefully meet up with him soon and and like get to know him, because it'd be cool to meet somebody in real life that shares these areas of interest, because as you know, like that's can be few and far between in the general population. So yeah, I mean, all I can speak of is like people that I know personally, and most of them seem pretty open-minded. In the UK, I can't speak more than family because I haven't really spoken to any of my old friends about these things. My gut feeling is that most of them would think I've gone mad. To be honest, I think half my family probably think I've gone mad. Like my brother is like he's a real smart guy. He's like a sciencey way of looking at things and kind of very skeptical, like me, but a different kind of skepticism to me. Um, I still think he probably thinks I'm a little bit crazy, but I don't know. Like
But he
I
still
just got to
loves
give it time. Yeah, I hope so. Um, but I'm just convinced that if anybody was interested enough, to sit down with me and actually talk about it, I just don't, I think I would be able to convince anybody that at the very minimum, reality is more mysterious than we accept currently. Like than the mainstream accepts. I think that is the easiest thing to convince anybody of, because for that, all we have to do is show that like 1% of this phenomena that we're interested in is real, and I think that's not difficult.
I have to make a little mention since he's my hero. I see you have Real Magic behind you, Dean Radin's book.
Yeah,
And um, uh, I've been a subject with him since 1998, and I know you've had him on for two shows.
yeah.
And is there anything about your interviews with him, or anything that he's doing that you want to share anything about? Or have you read most of his books, or what has?
I haven't actually read this one yet. This
Oh,
is on my reading list. This is one of the
okay.
next ones up. I've got quite a few books that I need to read, and I'm quite a slow reader, and like I can only read one at a time, right? I only have a certain amount of time and brain energy. But so anyway, that's on my reading list. I've got Supernormal in the other room, which I also haven't read. So I've got two of Dean's book on the reading list, but one of Dean's earlier books, The Conscious Universe. That's something I would like to kind of mention. I think the full title I think is The Conscious Universe: The Scientific Truth of Psychic Phenomena. And that was kind of one of the books that I read really at the start of my journey. It kind of set me on this path. So
Oh,
just to kind of really summarize what happened at that point, like I watched Surviving Death on Netflix. After watching that, I just knew that it was inevitable that at some point in my life I was going to read Surviving Death, the book. I just knew. I didn't know when. I didn't feel like I have to read it right now, but I remember this feeling of like I will read it. It's going to happen. It's just a when is the only question. Anyway, maybe 6 months later or something, I read it. And she, in the preface to that book, like in the introduction, Leslie talks about how ultimately when you've read this book you'll see that there are only, or like even going into it, she kind of introduces the idea that, as I mentioned earlier, the super psi hypothesis. She says basically it's super psi or survival. She says you can't explain the phenomena contained in this book via normal explanations, like by just the brain glitching before it dies or something like that. You just can't do it. So it's either psi or super psi or survival. And I remember at the time thinking like, that's a bit much for me. I could live with survival, but super psi, like what's this? I'm at that point, I'm not even open to open, yes, but I'm not aware of anything in regards to psychic phenomena. I'm like, whoa, like whoa here. So anyway, I read the book and just tried to not think too much about that super psi thing for the moment, because I just wanted to see how it was going. I'd just be open-minded. So I read Surviving Death, and by the end, I'm like, wow, pretty convinced that we survived death, although obviously I still wanted to do more research. But then immediately I was like, so that super psi thing she said about in the beginning, and like if this is real, maybe that could be real. The psychic phenomena, psychic stuff, which full well it is, because you have experiences all the time. But I was like, oh, I need to figure out now if there's some legitimacy to psychic stuff. So anyway, I looked online which book is going to be the best. The one that ended up being the one I read first was The Conscious Universe: The Scientific Truth of Psychic Phenomena by Dean Radin. And wow, like just crammed full of like meta-analysis of so many studies, so many experiments, over many years, over decades probably. And just yeah, just so much more than I ever anticipated there would be in terms of evidence. Like, so I just thought maybe it'll be, some kind of really wishy-washy stuff, but essentially is proven. Like, psychic phenomena is essentially proven at this point. Obviously, the vast majority of people and scientists don't accept that. Maybe they don't realize that, but I don't think they've looked at the evidence, most of them. But yeah, it's so compelling. Like, that book, so compelling. The Conscious Universe, I can't recommend it enough. And the same for Surviving Death. If somebody's interested in the idea of what happens after we die and they want to read a book, absolutely. Surviving Death, Leslie Kane, and Psychic Phenomena. Of course, Dean's newer books like Real Magic as well. He told me that's easier to digest than The Conscious Universe. He said The Conscious Universe was kind of made for like a more academic audience, which is maybe why it was harder for me to read. It took me some time till I really wanted to make sure I understood everything, but yeah, really fascinating stuff. And Dean's doing awesome work. And I know you've worked with Dean in the past and you're continuing to.
Yeah, I got when you get to Supernormal and you read the chapter on telepathy, I'm the Gale that he writes about in the doing the Gansfield
Awesome.
experiment there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm thrilled to be in it. As I always say, yes, I'm that Gale.
Yeah, nice. No, I can't wait to read it. I have so many, yeah, books that I really need to get to. I have like my reading list. As I said, it's kind of growing all the time because I get new books faster than I read books.
Well,
But yeah.
uh, we're coming on to we've had we're on our hour now, but I would like to find out where do you like what's your podcast? Is this, can you talk a little bit about your podcast for our audience? How they can, if you can, for the people who don't, I'll have things in the description, but could you just say your site or where they would be able to link to your YouTube? And do you feel, I mean, you have 6,000 subscribers already. That's a wonderful foundation there that you have. And I'm hoping for you to be at 10,000 soon. And I'm also really enjoying the fact that our listeners should know we're both two podcast people who've met each other from other people introducing us, which again is our Stanley Krippner. So
Yeah.
just a shout out to Stanley. I want to thank you for introducing me to Ben. And I
Yeah,
was
ditto.
thrilled to be on his show, and I'm really happy to have him on ours. And so I'd like to hear what other things you'd like to talk about in sort of, winding down the show.
Yeah, sure. So do you want me to do first, like telling people, yeah,
Yes,
how to find me and stuff? So
yes.
yeah, basically on YouTube, or I mean, you're going to put the links, but on YouTube or Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and a bunch of the other podcast apps, just search for Unraveling the Universe, Unraveling with two L's, although you should probably find us either way. It's the British spelling of the word. I just felt it looked nicer spelled that way. So that's why we did it like that. But anyway, just search for Unraveling the Universe, yeah, on any of these platforms, and you should find us. We've basically, all the topics that we cover are the things that we've touched on in this conversation, like all the kind of various evidence for survival, the psychic phenomena, UFOs, all of that kind of stuff. And I try to keep it down to earth, and open-minded and curious. And so yeah, hopefully people will be interested to look us up there. um what was your other question? Is there anything else I wanted to talk about?
Yes. Is there anything
I mean,
else you can share with the audience?
I think we've covered it pretty well. I guess I'll just mention briefly, if anybody's interested in the idea of the UAP UFO phenomenon, and maybe they weren't really aware of it before this, but they're intrigued, they should look into somebody called David Grush, who, yeah, is a fairly recent, like last summer, he went public. He's a youngish guy. He's a whistleblower. He used to work for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Used to have a very high security clearance and all this kind of thing. And anyway, he's come out and said it's some explosive things. He's on record under oath. Like, he's said in congressional hearings that the US government is in possession of recovered craft of non-human origin. He said that the US government is in possession of biologics of non-human origin. Um, and he's like said that people have been, I think, killed over keeping this secret, and he's felt like he's had threats on his life. Obviously I can't say too much more now, but people should look into that. You can find the full congressional hearing on YouTube. I did an interview not long after he went public with Leslie Kane, which for anybody that really follows the topic closely would be a little bit outdated now, but for somebody that's not so well versed, the interview is essentially an introduction to David Grush. Like, who is he? How did you meet him? How did you vet him? How are you, why are you confident that should we believe him, etc., etc. And what are the implications of it? So that's like the biggest thing that's happened in the last few years in the UFO issue, but it's a kind of constantly evolving thing.
Mhm.
um yeah, I thought I should mention David Grush in case people aren't aware.
Yes, yes. There was a woman, I gave her a ride once at a remote viewing conference when I was
Mhm.
with Russell Targ. I can't remember her name at this minute, but she flew to Europe to be at the bedside with someone during their dying who was part of that Area 51.
Mhm.
They had wanted to say before they died, they wanted to share their information. And so I think that some of these people in high positions, as they're getting older, are realizing that maybe they don't want to take that with them when they go.
Mm.
And it's really good that this gentleman has stepped forth, because it takes a lot to your career is on the line, your reputation in your family, your
Yeah,
being
your
threatened,
life potentially.
and yet they're if it's the and yet they're coming forth. So they should be given the respect to know what they just put up, that they're doing to be able to tell this information to the rest of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Like, it's not easy what he's done. Like, there's always detractors, or as our mutual friend Stanley would call them, scoffers, like people that just, just completely are just dismissive of everything. But he's like, yeah, he's gone public. He's left a very successful career. He could have done loads of other things career wise. Now it's going to be different for him. And I know obviously people sit at home and think, oh yeah, these UFO celebrities making loads of money. Like, he's not doing interviews. He's not being paid. As far as he's not doing interviews. He's not really being paid to do. He's not, as far as I know, he's not writing a book and like trying to hold back his claims. Like, he's trying to just do it properly. He's following the letter of the law. He's trying to do it legally. He's trying to get, clearance to say things and X, Y, and Z. But absolutely, like, he deserves our thanks. And I heard a couple of other people that have had deathbed confessions as well. One of them, I mentioned Danny Sheehan earlier, that I spoke to. He's received a deathbed confession from somebody that he just revealed the name of. But he said they used to work for Project Blue Book, and they told him they went to Area 51 or Area S4, which is like a kind of sub section of Area 51. And yeah, it's some wild stuff. There's so much out there. If you dive into this phenomenon of the UFO stuff, there's so much there. Obviously it's hard to know what's real and what's not, but even if less than 3% of it is real, like, it's a real phenomenon that deserves attention.
Well, I'm so glad that there's podcast hosts like you that's doing this kind of investigating with skepticism and bringing forth the information for all the 6,000 and more listeners that will be finding out new information from your great show. And does your show air once a week? That was one of my other questions.
So yes and no. Like, basically we did the whole of 2023. I think we did one a week, every week, maybe except January. We kind of, maybe we're taking off maybe 1 week a month now, but it's going to be once a week most weeks, pretty much every Friday, maybe with exception of one a month, something like that, where we're going to have a little bit more time to focus on other things. But yeah, most weeks, let's say most weeks.
That's wonderful. I do two a month, and I find that is more than I can handle.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. Like, yeah, we started with two a month, then we were like, oh, let's try one a week, maybe it'll help us grow faster. And it's pretty intense doing one a week. Like, I know some shows, like, they'll just record, the Zoom and put it straight on YouTube, and that would be a bit easier. But like, we do stuff to it, and so yeah, it
Your
takes
shows are
time.
very professionally done, and I wish mine could be as the quality that yours are, but I'm not up there yet.
My partner Harmony will be very happy to hear that. And she does
Yes,
all the kind of behind the scenes stuff. But no, your show's great, girl. Like, don't knock your show. Your
well,
show's great, and you've talked to so many fascinating people as well.
well,
I mean,
and from podcaster to podcaster, if there's anyone I know that I can introduce you to, please feel free to ask.
Thank you.
And
Ditto.
if there's anything else we want to share now, otherwise I'm gonna say our closing statement. Is there anything else you wanted to say before I do that?
I think I'm all good. I'll just say thank you again, and thank you for doing what you do. And like, you know, I love the style of your show where you kind of interject with your own stories, because you have so many fascinating stories and experiences to share. And I think it's good that you do that. I think it's good that you kind of insert those into the show. And yeah, just thank you for doing what you do, and thank you for being such an infectiously positive energy. You know, like just yeah.
Well, thank you. I feel very humble. So I want to thank you for being here today, and I'm so happy. I know that you and I will meet one day, even though you're in France and I'm in Sebastopol, California. But I know somehow we're going to meet, and I'm looking forward to that day. So I
Yeah,
want to
me too.
thank you for, I know it's late at night there. I want to thank you for being here this evening. And I want to tell all our listeners, thank you for subscribing, liking, sharing, joining us on all the different social media platforms, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube, and wherever other social media sites that we're on. So have a very, very wonderful week. Remember our saying about stories. Share your stories, because stories can heal. And thanks, and we look forward to seeing you again on the next show. Bye.
Awesome.